And we're running. All right. So good afternoon, everyone, since we are starting a few minutes late, and thanks for the help getting this room set up. Mitzvahs. We got them by the ton in this week's parasha of Teitzei. Exactly. There are a lot of mitzvahs in this particular parasha. By mitzvot, I mean many different commandments. There is a wide range, and we're going to look at one in particular, along with the sort of cluster that's around it. But if I were to ask you, what are the, what's a big mitzvah? What's a really, really heavy mitzvah? A really, really important mitzvah?
Save someone's life.
All right, so maybe save a life.
Caring of the dead.
Caring for the dead, ensuring that they have a proper burial, etc. Yes?
Well, she said saving a life,
Mhm.
but I was thinking of giving someone a life to live,
Mm-hmm.
teaching them a creative career or
Mhm.
something of that nature, or food, or how to grow their own food or something of that.
Let's just sort of, in general, we'll call that helping a life. Because there are many different varieties. It could be medical help, it could be economic help, it could be educational help, but in general, building up another life.
Helping someone to find God or to bring them back to God spiritually, giving them spiritual life.
We're going to put that under the, trying to make sure my letters are clear. We're going to call that keruf as a general term, meaning to reach out to others, to help bring them closer to God, or to help them find their path to God. It's interesting that so far we have only what we would call positive mitzvot. Only mitzvot that are thou shalt ... To quote King James, who had nothing to do with the Bible. Are there no big negative mitzvahs? How about don't murder? Is that a biggie? I mean, if someone actually committed murder, would you say that's a pretty big sin? You broke a pretty big mitzvah by murdering someone? Or would you say, well, you know, it's not such a big deal, happens every day? Yes? No? Maybe? What are some of the negative, the do not commandments that are considered biggies?
Worshipping idols.
Maybe on the antithesis of bringing someone towards God, the opposite would be idolatry, of either worshiping an idol yourself or, God forbid, leading someone else into idol worship.
Preventing the theft.
Or we could say that then theft would be a pretty big mitzvah that might get broken. That if you steal something, you've broken a pretty big mitzvah. Or is ranking of mitzvot uncomfortable? Is this something we're not at ease doing? Something we don't normally prioritize? We don't sit down and say, what are the biggies that if someone violates them, boy, are they in trouble? And what are the ones that if you break it, you know, it's not such a big deal? I mean, after all, if you mix wool and linen in your clothing, is that such a big deal compared to murder? You know, they're both thou shalt nots. But do we say they are of equal importance or equal weight in our eyes? Or in the eyes of God? Keep that in mind as we go through our list of mitzvot that we're going to start with in this week's parasha of Ki Teitzei. Of, is this a heavy mitzvah? Is this a light mitzvah? Is it an important mitzvah? Or is it it's a nice thing that God mentioned, but come on, is this going to be a big deal? And we'll see what we can uncover. And you should bear in mind that as we are approaching Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, part of our cheshbon nefesh, part of our spiritual accounting, often involves, internally at least, the dialogue of, well, was it such a really big thing that I did that I have to go say I'm sorry for? Was it really that bad? And of course, was it really so bad that I didn't ... whenever there was an opportunity for a mitzvah that was overlooked or missed for whatever reason? So bear that in mind as we start, and we'll come back to that when we get to the end. Sound
Can
good?
I ask a strange question?
Of course.
What does the word mitzvah mean?
Literally, it means a commandment. It was popularized in the Yiddish-speaking world in particular to generally mean a good deed.
Okay,
I
think of a mitzvah as something positive, not
Correct.
anything negative.
Well, again, the term negative commandment doesn't mean negative in the sense of being bad. It means a prohibition, as opposed to a positive commandment, which is a requirement. So commandments can both require action or prohibit action. And when we use the terms positive and negative, that's what we're referring to. But the word mitzvah itself just means commandment. It means an order, a requirement that you either do or a prohibition that you do not do. And yes, the Yiddish-speaking world turned the word mitzvah into a general sort of Boy Scout motto of, do good deeds. And certainly good deeds are a deep part of doing mitzvot, but the word mitzvah itself doesn't only mean do good deeds. It also means avoiding things that are considered prohibitions from the Torah. And there are things that are good that are not necessarily a mitzvah, but you should still do them anyway, because they are good to do. That make sense? Okay. We are going to start on chapter 22, which begins on page 1115. This is in the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, and chapter 22. And like I said, we're going to see quite a few different mitzvot as we start off here. And speaking of starting off, any volunteers? Thanks, Ria.
If you see your fellow's ox or sheep gone astray, do not ignore it. You must take it back to your fellow. If your fellow does not live near you, or you do not know who he is, you shall bring it home, and it shall remain with you until your fellow claims it. Then you shall give it back to him. You shall do the same with his ass. You shall do the same with his garment, and so too shall you do with anything that your fellow loses. And you find you must not remain indifferent.
All right, so what's the mitzvah here?
Returning something that doesn't belong to you.
Returning lost property, right? Whether it be an animal that was lost or whether it be a garment that was lost or anything that was lost by someone else, you have an obligation to return it. Plus, well, there's some details of this, right?
Well, if you don't know who it is,
then you just leave it where it is.
Hold on to the merchandise until you figure out who it belongs to.
So not only do you have to return it, but you also have to take care of it in the meantime if you don't know how to return it. So if I'm walking along and I see a wallet on the side of the road, do I have to pick it up and try to find a way to return it? Or do I have to return it if I pick it up? Do you see the distinction? Am I obligated when I come across a lost item to begin the process of seeking its return? Or do I only have to return it if I bother to bend over and pick it up in the first place? And I can just keep walking past it and pretend like I didn't see it, and that's okay.
Well, it says don't remain indifferent.
Correct. Exactly. So Torah absolutely says when you see something that is clearly in a state of loss, you have to do what you can to return it. It doesn't matter that it's going to be inconvenient. Doesn't matter that it's going to take time. Doesn't matter that it might be hard. Doesn't matter that it may even cost you to have to return things or to take care of it in the meantime. You are obligated to do what you can to return it. And you cannot simply say, a wallet, if I pick it up, I'm going to have to try and find the owner, and then I'm going to have to meet him at Starbucks or something to give it back, or I'm going to have to take it to the police, and they'll probably want to ask me questions and fill out a report. You know what? I'll just leave it here. I'll just leave it. Because, the person probably doesn't even expect to get it back now anyway. So why bother? No, says Torah. Pick it up and now begin the process of trying to return it. Make sense? Okay. So that's, if you go back to your other question, Ria, that's where you begin to see some of the distinctions between if you define the word mitzvah as only being a good deed, well, I could choose not to take this opportunity to do a good deed. But if mitzvah is a commandment, my choice is gone. and now I have to take this and return it, even if I wasn't looking for a good deed to do. I'm now in the zone of obligation. Okay, keep going.
If you see your fellow's ass or oxen fallen on the road, do not ignore it. You must help him raise it.
All right, so what's our mitzvah?
Being helpful.
Assistance.
Assistance. Someone else has their donkey, their ox, and they're going along the road, and it's been overburdened or even just tired from the burden it was carrying, and it's down. You've got to get there, help them unpack it, help them reload it, help the animal back to its feet, and it's an obligation. It's not, it'd be nice if you would, it's you must do this. You do not get to choose whether or not you want to be a good Samaritan, to use a reference from another Bible. It is an obligation. Keep going.
A woman must not put on man's apparel, nor shall a man wear woman's clothing. For whoever does these things is abhorrent to the Lord your God.
All right, strong prohibition on deliberately swapping gender-specific clothing. And again, this is not just you shouldn't, it's don't. Don't do this. Now, there are many, many gray details and many, many points of finer interpretation of what counts as a male garment and what counts as a woman's garment. And this causes an awful lot of confusion and frustration depending upon what community you might be living in. But our sages have mostly said throughout history that it is culturally relevant, relative, I should say. So if you live in an area where everybody wears togas, that doesn't mean that you're now wearing a dress just because it's open around the bottom. And indeed, for much of our history, people wore tunics that we would now consider to look a lot more like a dress than we would consider appropriate man attire. But that was what was natural for them in those generations. And similarly now, I think that most people understand that if you were going to wear nylons, that would probably be considered women's clothing. Even though if you went back a couple hundred years, men would wear hose of all types throughout much of Europe. It was a natural part of the Renaissance and Elizabethan and all that good thing. Whenever you see those Shakespeare plays, that's what they're all wearing, because that was what was normal for those generations. So not wearing men or women's clothing is not quite as easy to define, but there is a definite prohibition once you have defined what is exclusively male or exclusively female. And yes, there is such a thing as unisex clothing as well.
Having read along a little bit.
You're reading ahead?
Well, I did before. Why is this mitzvah here, in this place, where all these other mitzvahs are somewhat similar in context?
I mean, why is this mitzvah different from than all the other mitzvahs around it? That's an interesting question that can bring a lot of speculation, which we're not going to go into. But it is always an interesting thing to go into another time. Of the ordering of the mitzvot, of the presentation, and what we might or may not learn by one mitzvah's juxtaposition with other mitzvot in a sequence. And I believe it's probably going to be the next mitzvah that you would say is carrying on with maybe an animal motif, and that makes the wearing the other clothing seem out of place.
On the road, animals, nests.
Okay, well let's go ahead and see this next mitzvah.
If along the road you chance upon a bird's nest in any tree or on the ground with fledglings or eggs, and the mother sitting over the fledgling or on the eggs, do not take the mother together with her young. Let the mother go and take only the young, in order that you may fare well and have a long life.
All right, so what's the mitzvah? Bless you.
Saving the reproduction.
No,
I mean, we say the.
not what's the reason for the mitzvah. What's the mitzvah?
Oh.
What's the actual commandment here? Well, we're going to talk extensively about the reasons behind this. In case you're wondering which mitzvah we're highlighting, it's going to be this one. But what is the actual mitzvah that's being commanded here?
Let mother go.
To let the mother go before you take the young or the eggs. That you're not allowed. There's a prohibition. You're not allowed to take the mother and the eggs. And there is also a positive commandment, that is to say a requirement for action, to send the mother away before you take the eggs or fledglings. We got that? Mm-hmm. Okay, and we will come back to the whys. But just hold on to that for a minute.
Why not leave the young one with the
You mean why not leave all of it?
Yeah.
Because I'm hungry.
Oh.
So one of the things, and like I said, we're going to come back to this mitzvah. We're going to finish a few more, but we're going to come back to this one in some detail. But one thing that's very important to remember is, underlines this entire mitzvah itself, is that in the ancient world, you didn't look a gift horse in the mouth when it came to food. That if you could eat it, you probably did. Because for much of history, people did not get enough food on a daily basis. And if you come across a lovely little protein snack like mother and eggs or chicks, you would want to eat all of it. Because that is calories that are from heaven. I mean, it's a gift from God that you came across this. And who are you to ignore such a gift? Which is why there's a commandment of what to do when it happens. Because the natural inclination would just be gobble, 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 to eat them all right there and be very happy for your good fortune of finding them.
Would compassion be the reason for taking having the mother away before they take the chicks?
We will come back to the reason, but that's a very good idea to add to that discussion. But let's just finish up a few more in this list, and then we'll come back to that. But we're all on the right page.
When you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof, so that you do not bring blood guilt on your house if anyone should fall from it.
All right, so we understand what a parapet is, like a fence, a rail around the top of the roof. Again, historically in the ancient Near East, the roofs were generally flat, and the roofs were usable surfaces. You would dry food up there, you would store things up there. In a hot climate, you would often sleep up there, and the requirement is to actually put a guardrail around the top of your roof rather than just letting it be a drop to the floor. Make sense? So OSHA was alive and well back then.
You shall not sow your vineyard with a second kind of seed, else the crop from the seed you have sown and the yield of the vineyard may not be used. You shall not plow with an ox and an ass together. You shall not wear cloth combining wool and linen.
All right, so we got three mitzvot in rapid fire succession. The first one was
Two different kinds of seed.
no double sowing. You can't sow with two seeds in one area. Second one was
Two different animals.
don't try and plow with two different animals. And the third was
For cloth.
two different types of materials being used to make one garment. And both of those all three of those are prohibited. And here we could quickly say that maybe the reason for the three being clustered is because they each represent a blending of two things that apparently should be kept separate. A blending of seeds, a blending of plow animals, and a blending of cloths.
They are so today.
What's that?
They are so today with the material.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. When you go to buy clothing as a Jew, you should look at the label and make sure that it is not wool and linen blend. It's not such a big issue for most casual clothes now because they're often made from cotton, which was not in ready supply back then, and it also, many things are made from artificial materials now, so it doesn't come up as often. But in higher end clothing, like nicer suits and such, that's where you often will find this as still an issue. Yep. And something that is still a mitzvah that needs to be observed. And certainly not one that most people would call a good deed. This is not your Boy Scout definition of mitzvah. This is an obligation type mitzvah.
What is the harm of putting these two things together? Why would it not? Why is it a bad thing?
Because you'd be breaking a commandment.
There's no explanation.
Well, are there explanations that are given by commentators later? Yes. Is there any explanation given by God in Torah itself? No. And this is something that we often face, that gives rise to a lot of discussion. We like to talk about things as Jews. And we are going to, in fact, use that same idea of, well, how come there isn't more explanation? And what could we use as an explanation to go back and look at the case of the nest and the mother? All right? Good. So let me keep a copy for myself and begin the handout distribution. Hopefully without throwing myself to the ground. All right, now don't start reading. I'm just wanting to get these around. do this without breaking the picture behind it. All right. Why? Or more specifically, why not? Both. And why can't I take both the mother and the eggs or chicks? And why do I have to send the mother away before I do take what I can, which is the eggs or the chicks? Some ideas?
And first of all, the mother can continue to produce the more birds,
Okay.
more babies, so that for human being to use, just like don't kill the golden, the goose lady
You see that.
So there's two answers there, really, that Julia mentioned. One is survivability, which is to mean the mother can survive on her own. The eggs or the fledglings cannot. So if you're only going to take one or the other, then it wouldn't make sense to take the mother, because by taking the mother, you have now condemned the eggs or chicks to death, because they're not survivable on their own. And the second part of what she said, which is really a separate reason, but also connected, is sustainability, which is you don't take all of it, because if you leave some behind, and in this case the mother, then the species has the chance to continue and to propagate, and as Julia mentioned, for your future use, right? So there's a sustainability for us. So perhaps we would interpret the idea that, as we see at the end of that verse, that's verse 7 back on 1117, that you let it go and take the young in order that you may fare well and have a long life. Perhaps what is being said, according to this interpretation, is the long life that you will enjoy and the goodness you will enjoy is because you have managed your resources well. And you'll be able to continue to survive because there will be more chicks, there will be more food in the future by having managed these resources in a responsible way. Any other explanations? Sally and Nikki were both sort of hinting at another option. Compassion. Compassion for?
The mother pains seeing her babies taken away.
So one idea is that it would be painful for the mother to watch you take the chicks or take the eggs, and so you're supposed to send the mother away, not just because you're not eating her, but you actually have to get her out of sight in order that you can take those eggs and chicks without causing the mother emotional distress, without causing the bird pain from having watched her eggs, her chicks be taken. That's very sweet, isn't it?
Yeah, and also protect ourselves as well, because some animal, if they see you take away their baby, all this, they will come back to revenge.
And safety. Do you know how mad a mother bird can get? You go try and take her eggs. You better get her out of there before you try and take them, or else you're going to get a good pecking. So perhaps the mitzvah is just there as a strong piece of advice, that this is something you should do for your own sake, and if you don't, you're stupid. The same way that if you don't put a rail around the top of your roof, it's on your head if anyone gets hurt, including yourself. So if you don't shoo the mother away, you're just asking for a pecking. So perhaps we can blend them together that way. Is this a big mitzvah from our initial discussion? Yeah? Yes? No? Maybe?
It helps us, I think, translate the other relationships and develops the tenderness and compassion that can be transferred to other events. So it changes our moral character, in a sense.
Moral cultivation. That by extending this act to the bird, that we are cultivating a certain moral sensibility that has to do with compassion or some other aspect that is considered a laudable character trait, and that will benefit and carry over into our other relationships and other encounters. So by doing this, we become a better person, and becoming a better person is better for other people and better for us in the long run. But the actual benefit to the bird, meh, is a side benefit. It's not the goal. Is that a fair assessment? All right, well, we've listed most of the explanations given by classical commentators, so let's run through them and see if we can't put ourselves in the place of what our tradition has said and see who agrees with us and who disagrees. All right, so the first opinion, which we're only going to look at one source for, but it's mentioned in many places, is that this mitzvah is for the benefit of the birds. That it's not to benefit us, but it's to benefit them. Would it get a reader for our texts? Please don't all volunteer at once. It makes it hard to pick. Ria, why don't you keep going?
Rabbi, whoever.
Berachia. Was that why no one wanted to volunteer? They all looked at the second word and said, I'm not reading that name.
Said, in the name of Rabbi Levi, it is written, a righteous man knows the needs of his animal. A righteous man. This is the Holy One, for it is written in his Torah, do not take the mother together with her young.
All right, so in the book of Proverbs, it says a righteous man knows the needs of his animals. And Rabbi Levi is saying that that term, righteous man, is a stand-in for the word God. And God knows the needs of his animals, that is to say, all of his creations. And how do we know that God knows the needs of his animals and tends to them? He even sends the mother away when you have to take the eggs of the fledglings. So it shows that God is taking care of his animals by the mitzvot that he gave to us. So that the mitzvah, according to this reading, is not about us. The mitzvah is about making sure that God is able to take care of the animals by preventing us from harming them excessively. Make sense? So stop being so species chauvinistic and thinking that all the mitzvot are just for you. Some of the mitzvot are for the other animals' benefits to keep humans from stepping on them, so to speak. Make sense? Yay? Nay? Meh? Are you uncomfortable with the idea that a mitzvah would be given to us, a limit on our behavior, just because this is the way God is tending to the natural world by limiting our actions?
Well, even kashrut, the nice thin slice of the herb is compassion.
So kashrut could certainly also be interpreted by the way that shechita, the slaughter, takes place, is meant to be as compassionate to the animal that is being killed as possible. And it doesn't really matter to us, right? Whether the animal suffers or not, it's just for the animal's sake that it doesn't suffer, you might argue. And therefore, perhaps those requirements are God looking out for his animals in that way as well.
Anything God does to benefit the animals really is benefiting us, because the better off the animals are, the better off we will be.
To a certain extent, but you might take that line a little too far. And in fact, we're going to see that in the next paragraph. Ria, can you read the next line?
These
Agadot, these teachings, right?
Which presented difficulties for the Rav,
Meaning Rambam.
in my view, have a different meaning. They mean to say that there is no benefit in the mitzvot to the Holy One himself, but rather the benefit is for man, to prevent him from being harmed, or from a false belief or a deplorable attribute.
All right, so that these mitzvot, among of which is included the sending away the mother bird, it's not about God, it's not about the bird, it's about us. And it's about creating the proper us that we should be. Keep going.
Similarly, that which they said, because he is making the attributes of the Holy One into mercy, whereas they are nothing other than decrees, means to say that God did not have compassion on the nested bird, and his mercy did not extend to the animal and its young, for his compassion does not extend to animals to prevent us from fulfilling our needs with them. For if so, he would have prohibited their slaughter. Rather, the reason for the prohibition is to teach us the trait of compassion.
All right, so Ramban, Nachmanides, is arguing that, if we thought God loved the animals so much that he wanted to take care of them, he wouldn't let us eat them. And if the very fact that God lets us slaughter and eat animals, when going through the appropriate method, shows that God's okay with us killing animals in the appropriate way. Now this reference in the middle where it says, because he is making the attributes of the Holy One into mercy, whereas they are only decrees, this is a quote taken from the Mishnah, where if someone tries to offer up a prayer that says that God has mercy even on the bird and her nest, that such a person is prohibited from leading services with a prayer like that. And if they just start, praying extemporaneously, and that's what they use as a reference, as a way of praying to God, that we shout them down and remove them from the bima. Pretty stark. There's some very interesting theories of other reasons why this may have happened, of why it may have been a polemic against people that were promoting other beliefs during the rabbinic period, alternative and conflicting beliefs to Judaism. But what they're trying to point out here in this commentary is that we shouldn't think that God made this command just because God was compassionate on birds. But instead should understand God made the command so that it would be a command, and the benefit isn't the bird's benefit. The benefit is ours through moral cultivation. And the birds just happen to be the vehicle for that moral cultivation. But if you think God likes birds, why did he let us eat them? Not the usual way you show somebody you like them. Make sense? Yes? No? Okay. And let's extend that notion that this mitzvah is really for our benefit.
And what is the reward for this mitzvah? That if you do not have children, I will grant you children. How do you know this?
How do you, what? I really wish I could turn the video camera around right now, because that expression is perfect. Wait a minute. So if I don't have kids, if my wife and I were unable to have children, and then I come across a nest and I shoo the mother away and I take the fledglings, I'll get children? Pardon? What's the possible connection? What possible proof text could we have? Keep reading now.
As it is stated, send away the mother, and what reward do you take? You shall take the young.
You shall take the young. What does it mean to take the young? It means you will have young of your own. Now, this is a little bit more awkward in the English, because in English we often use the word young for an animal, and we use the word child for a human. But in the Hebrew, it's the same word, banim. So you will send away the mother, and then you will take for yourself children, the children. And rather than thinking that the children is the reference to the bird's children, read it instead as being the children is reference to human children that you will then acquire, having done this mitzvah. So what they're doing is essentially cutting the verse in half. We're following the logic. I'm not saying that we're agreeing with the principle, but are we following the logic? Right? If you send away the mother, you will take for yourself the children. Don't read the bird's children, read the children you've been hoping for, that you haven't had yet. I'm not looking out and seeing a lot of love for this idea. Is that too, seems a little stretch? Is it too mechanistic? That if you do this mitzvah, then a childless couple will have children? Does that seem, is that uncomfortable?
It seems strange.
It seems strange. Okay. I should point out, there is a notion of something being a segula. This is a sort of contemporary expression. And a segula is an act for which there will be a benefit right afterwards. So for example, if you are having trouble having children, if you're able to do this mitzvah, you'll have children. If you, there was another comment of, you're not supposed to curse the Egyptian. So therefore, if you have a neighbor that is an Egyptian and you deliberately don't curse him, then you will merit prosperity. There is a notion, and you can find many leaflets, many emails, and many posters in Israel as well as in many Orthodox communities to this day that will list, if you do X, Y, and Z mitzvah in particular way, PDQ, you will merit whatever benefits you're looking for, whether it be finding a spouse, whether it be having children, whether it be good health, whether it be good success in business. And these are sent round and shared so that people will know the secret handshake to get the payoff that they're looking for. No one's ready to sign up? Okay. Let's see if we can push what the benefit might be even more.
This was as if to say, just as you wish us to have mercy upon them, in keeping with the verse, for his mercy is upon all his works, so you should set an example of this by having mercy upon us.
All right? So God, if you want us to have mercy on your works, for example, sending away the chick, or sending away the mother to take the chicks, you show us mercy first. You set a good example for us, God, please. Be merciful to us, and then we will understand how or why we should be merciful to the animals. And by extension, if we happen to be merciful to the animals, we are expecting that your mercies will extend to us. It's the sort of corollary of that. You're following the logic here?
Yeah, it's like you're bargaining with God.
It's like you're bargaining with God, yes, absolutely. But why shouldn't we expect a certain interaction, a certain quid pro quo of our behavior and God's response? I mean, isn't that what a relationship between, human and God is supposed to be all about? Manipulating, or, I mean, do you manipulate your teacher into giving you a good grade by studying hard and passing the exam? I mean, you force them to give you an A because you did good work. But if you want the A and you do good work, that's natural. That's how it should be. Right? I mean, have I somehow broken the system if I work hard and then I'm able to make money? Is that manipulative of society, that I've exploited society in some way?
Well, I think like some people may tithe 10% and expect, because God bless thee, now if I test me, and then they lose their job when they say, so there are people that say, well, I did this, but you can't live your life that way, really.
So reducing it to a purely mechanistic form, as opposed to a aspirational form, does come with a lot of difficulties. Absolutely, that sometimes when we treat it as though it is a simple calculation, it can often leave us wanting for the resolution we were hoping for, and we will come back to that as well. But there's an even bigger payoff for doing this than you've probably ever imagined. Keep going, just in case you thought this wasn't a big mitzvah.
For redemption. Another explanation. What does it mean, send away the mother? That if you fulfill this mitzvah, you will hasten the coming of the King Messiah, about whom it is written, sending. How do we know? As it is written, sending the ox and donkey.
And the quote from Isaiah uses the same word as for sending. Send away the mother, and the sending of the ox and the donkey, both are using that same term. Therefore, we can make a connection, which means by sending away the mother, you are helping God send Mashiach sooner. No? All right, well, keep going. Keep going. We'll explain the apparatus. The next section comes from the Zohar.
There is an angel appointed over the birds. And when Israel performs this commandment, and the mother departs weeping, and her children crying, he agonizes for his birds.
All right, so we got the picture. When you're shooing away the mother, and she's crying away, and the babies are beep, 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 because the mother's just left, and you're pulling them up, you're being a jerk, is essentially what's happening here. You're making the mother and the children suffer. When you do that, you force the angel of birds, the angel that is appointed over all birds, to go crying to God and say,
does it not say that his compassion is on all of his works? Why did you decree on that bird to be exiled from her nest?
Sorry, I like interrupting, sorry. So this angel goes to God and says, hey, well, in your Tanakh, in the Psalms, it says that your compassion is on all your works. So why are you letting that jerk of a human mess up this nest? You are breaking the rules, God. You're breaking the rules. That's not fair. That's not fair. And what does God say?
And what does the Holy One do? He gathers all of his other angels and says to them, this angel is concerned for the welfare of a bird and is complaining of its suffering. Is there none amongst you who will speak on behalf of my children Israel, and for the Shekhinah, which is in exile, and for whose nest in Jerusalem has been destroyed, and whose children are in exile under the hand of harsh masters? Is there no one who seeks compassion for them and will attribute merit to them? Then the Holy One issues a command and says, for my sake I shall act, and I shall act for my sake. And compassion is thereby aroused upon the Shekhinah and the children in exile.
Okay. So what you thought was a survivability, sustainability, compassion, safety, moral cultivation act is in fact triggering a cosmic orchestra of reaction. By making the birds suffer, you make the bird's angel suffer. And the bird's angel goes and complains to God. And when God hears its complaint, he turns to all the other angels and says, no, I've got this guy complaining about the plight of a bird. How come the rest of you aren't complaining about what's happening to the children of Israel? You know what? I'm sick of waiting for you guys to come to their defense. I'll help them. So by sending away the mother and making her and her children suffer, you are bringing mercy and redemption to Israel. Neat trick.
But why the two-part statement? For my sake I shall act, and I shall act for my sake.
Because God is trying to reinforce, according to the Zohar, that he's not acting because it has been deserved, and he's not acting because he has been persuaded by the angels. He's acting because it is for his own sake, his own nature, to behave mercifully. That's the implication. Now, we might still take some issue with this, and indeed there is a subversive element to this script, to this this dialogue that's happening here, which is, well, yeah, well, if God does have compassion on birds, why doesn't he have compassion on us, Israel? When I read in the Torah that God cares enough to tell us to shoo the mother away before I take the bird, how come I don't feel that compassion in my life from God? How come we still live in exile? How come we still live under foreign oppression? Again, specifically at the time that this text was being written. If God cares so much about birds, why doesn't he care a little bit, even just the same amount as for us? And the answer, of course, is God does, but he has to be roused to that compassion by showing cruelty to the bird. That by seeing the cruelty to the bird, God then is set in motion. And if you consider that manipulative, you're probably right. That does seem to be the mechanic that is that's taking place here. But the underlying inference is one that is very powerful, of looking for compassion and looking for mercy. But what difference does it make what meaning we ascribe? I mean, if I say it's for compassion to the bird, or if I say it's for compassion that I'll show other people, if I say it's for my personal safety or for its sustainability of the species or sustainability of our own resources, does it make a difference? Does it change the mitzvah? The mitzvah is the mitzvah, right? Regardless of whatever reason you stick on it. When you come across a nest and you want to eat the young, make sure you shoo the mother away first. Yes? No. Sometimes the meaning will change how you carry out the mitzvah. And that's why sometimes arguing about the meaning behind a mitzvah, it can be a very important part of understanding how or when you will do the mitzvah. So let's take a look at when we actually engage in this mitzvah. Let's see. Ria, do you want to keep reading? You're okay with that?
Yeah.
Please.
An easy mitzvah such as this, which has no monetary loss, nor bodily effort, why is its reward so great? The treasure of the mitzvah, who sees them and who knows their greatness?
That's a rhetorical question.
For it is without limit. No eye has seen it except for that of God. From here, we will recognize the elevated nature of the more severe commandments.
All right, so Rav Isaac Caro, this is actually Joseph Caro's uncle, Joseph Caro being the author of the Shulchan Aruch, or editor would be a more appropriate term, is saying, look, you don't know what benefit comes from the mitzvot. So you should absolutely do this when it happens. And don't think of it as being inconsequential, as being a light mitzvah, as being a small mitzvah, not a biggie. Because it seems to have a pretty big reward attached to it. And hopefully that will also help you understand why you should do the severe, the big, the heavy mitzvah as well. But to what lengths then should I go seeking this reward?
Pious men and those of deeds go around the mountains and hills of the villages in the darkness of night and put themselves in danger in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Shiluach Hakim,
which is the Hebrew technical phrase for this mitzvah, the sending away of the mother. So, according to this, there are people that go out of their way, climbing through forest trees, looking for a nest, going in and out of the rooftops, looking for a nest that has a mother and eggs, so that they can do this mitzvah. They don't actually want to eat the chicks or the eggs. They want to do the mitzvah because they want the merit of doing the mitzvah. They want the spiritual benefit, or they want the redemptive benefit. I mean, after all, if doing this mitzvah rouses God to have mercy upon the children of Israel or brings the Messiah one step closer, wouldn't you go out of your way to do it too? Right? If every time you hit this mitzvah button, you are pumping the world closer towards redemption, then you should be looking for birds left, right, and center, even if you ain't hungry, just so you can keep hitting that reward button over and over again.
Isn't that selfish?
Is it selfish to want to bring the redemption? Is it selfish to want to bring Mashiach? Is it selfish to want children if you believe that this will bring you children? Well, it's a tricky question. But it does put a person in a position where they are deliberately trying to engineer the circumstances where they can do a mitzvah. It is, in fact, the equivalent of, well, it's a mitzvah that if you get a divorce, you give your wife a get. So therefore, I will deliberately divorce my wife so I can give her a get. I don't actually want to divorce her, but this way I get mitzvah points for giving her a get. And then I can always remarry her afterwards, if she'll have me again. What's that?
Taking up too much time.
Taking up too much time, or it's a mitzvah for so many of the things that have to do with the farm. So I will deliberately go out of my way to buy and run a farm, just so I can do all the mitzvahs associated with that. I don't actually want a farm. I don't know anything about farming, but this way I'll be able to get those mitzvah points by having put myself in a position where I'm now required to do them. Even though God didn't say you have to have a farm. Just like God didn't say you have to go looking for birds. It's if you happen upon it. And of course, more poignantly, the very first mitzvah that is mentioned in this particular parasha of Teitzei is what happens when you go off to war and you come across a beautiful captive. And under what circumstances you can bring her home to be a wife. Now, are we saying that you should deliberately go off to war so that you can fall in love with a captive woman and bring her back and make her your wife? Is that like a good scheme for getting more mitzvah points? I think most people would probably say, that's not exactly what we're talking about here. And indeed, the Meiri, the commentator that we're reading next, takes that approach. Rhea, can you keep reading for the next paragraph?
The mitzvah of Shiluach Hakim is not a mitzvah that one is required to pursue. That is to say, if one finds a nest, that one must take the young in order to fulfill the mitzvah of sending away the mother, or that one should travel the mountains and hills after this mitzvah. Rather, when the opportunity presents itself, he can fulfill it, as it says, when one happens across.
All right, so Meiri takes the position, which I imagine more of us are comfortable with, which is you know, if you come across a nest and you want the eggs or the chicks, this is how you do it. But you don't have to go looking for a nest. You don't have to go looking for this to have the opportunity to do the mitzvah. It's just if you want it, even if you come across a nest, if you don't want the eggs or the chicks, leave the nest alone and just keep walking. Now, the rationale then becomes very important. Because let's say, for example, I'm not going out and hunting for nests, but I'm just walking along and I come across a nest with the mother and the young. If I believe that the purpose of the mitzvah is for moral cultivation or to show compassion to the animals or for sustainability or the survivability of the species, blah, 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 and I'm not hungry, I keep walking and leave the nest just where it is. But if I believe the reason for the mitzvah is that by deliberately provoking the mother bird into sorrow, I am then causing a metaphysical change in the heavens above and this whole argument with the angels that will lead to mercy for the children of Israel, then I'm almost required to bother the mother. Because by making her suffer, I can alleviate our suffering. So you end up with very different results depending upon what purpose you see is behind this mitzvah. And you end up in many ways almost with contrary results. Because if the real mission is for showing compassion to the animal or cultivating our compassion by extending it to the animal so that we will extend it to other humans, then if I am deliberately provoking agony in the mother and the babies for my own benefit, I am in fact cultivating quite the opposite character trait, which is I can exploit other aspects of God's world for my or for the children of Israel's benefit if I think it's worthwhile. And that doesn't seem to jibe in both ways. See the conflict? Hard, isn't it, to be a Jew? Just for the record, I do not feel that those who try to take the teaching of the Zohar, which I think is meant to be a more metaphorical fist shaking at heaven, I do not believe that those who take it literally and who seek out opportunities in order to annoy birds are actually performing the mitzvah as God intended or will receive any benefit that they think they might. It is going against the more obvious and more well attributed meanings of the mitzvah. But it does bring us to this question of, so is it a big mitzvah or is it a little mitzvah? And what difference does it make? So we're going to finish off in this month of Elul, this month of Tshuva, when we are doing our self-reflection, with a selection from Rambam's discussion of what it means to do Tshuva, what it means to come back to God. So Ria, can you take us through the last few little paragraphs there?
The calculation of merits and sins is not based on the number of good deeds and bad deeds. The calculation is based on the sincerity and vigilance that he did the deed with. One may have done a merit that outweighs many sins, as it is written, for in him alone a good quality was found. The Talmud explains that although Avia followed in his eagle father's footsteps, he had one great merit. He called off the guards his father had installed to prevent the people from going to Jerusalem for the Yamim Tovim.
The festivals where people would go as pilgrims. So after the north and south of Israel split, following the death of Solomon, the kings in the north did not want to let people go to Jerusalem because that would kind of undermine the legitimacy of their separate state. And as for that, as well as many other sins, it was prophesied that Avia would actually die as being one of the children of Jeroboam and be eaten by dogs. But he did die, but he was not eaten by dogs. He did receive a burial. And the Talmud says, well, why? This guy was evil. He was an idolater. He was just as bad as his father. And they said, yeah, almost. Because one thing he did really, really right, and that was he stopped preventing the people from going to Jerusalem. And because of that one deed, he was able to remove the curse of not being buried and being eaten by dogs. And therefore he received a proper burial. Doesn't make him into a mensch, but it did lessen the decree against him. And you can't say, well, it was just one deed, because it was a deed that in the eyes of God was significant enough to counter the crimes that he had amassed that would have resulted in his being, eaten by dogs. So we can't do a simple calculation. You can't just sit down and say, well, I did 3 mitzvahs on Friday, so I can do 2 mitzvahs, I can do 2 averas, I can do 2 sins on Shabbat, and I'll still come out ahead. It doesn't work like that. It's when we talk about a spiritual accounting, we don't mean like balancing your checkbook. The numbers behind each of the sins, of the negative on that side, and behind each of the mitzvot, the positive on this side, are hidden. We don't know what they are. All we know is the sincerity or the diligence with which we committed them, either the sin or the mitzvah. And we have to make sure that we stay on this side. Keep going.
Alternatively, one may have done a sin that outweighs many merits. As it is written, a single error destroys much of value. The weighing of merits and sins is done according to the wisdom of God our Creator. He does not entrust these decisions to any of his creations.
So don't think you can sit down and do the math yourself, and certainly don't think you can sit down and do the math for your neighbor about what you think his spiritual checkbook looks like. But do understand that just because you study Torah and you teach and you give tzedakah and you are always honest in your business and you're a good father and a good husband doesn't mean that you can then, as we've seen too many cases, abuse a child and think, well, all my good deeds will balance out this one horrible sin. No, in the eyes of God, you may have just destroyed every merit that you had on the positive side with this one heinous negative act. And you can't just sit back and say, my righteous deeds will protect me from any punishment for one sin. So it's just one, right? No, you don't get to do that kind of math. And finally, just to drive the point home, Rambam finishes.
Alternatively, I can't even read. One can regret and repent the good deeds that one has done, just as one can repent the bad deeds that he has done. And all his mitzvot will be lost as if he never did them. By saying to himself, what did I gain by doing them? I wish I had not done them. He loses all of his mitzvot. As it is written, the righteousness of the righteous will not serve him when he transgresses.
So imagine a person who had gone around hunting every nest he could possibly find, shooing the birds out because he was desperate to have a child. And then no child comes. And so he says to heaven, why did I bother doing this mitzvah? Why did I bother doing any of the mitzvahs I've ever done if you will not give me a child, a good job, good health, a spouse, whatever it is that I am desperate for in this life? Why did I bother? It was a waste of my time, a waste of my money, a waste of my energy. I wish I'd never done them. I could have been out drinking, carousing, cheating, stealing, all these other wonderful things, and not have bothered with the mitzvot. And God says, you know what, you're right. And all the merit you got from those mitzvahs, they're nothing. Not only can we regret sins, but unfortunately, many people will regret their mitzvot. They will regret having done good. The nice guys finish last lament that you'll hear. Why do I bother following the rules when everyone else cheats? Why do I bother going the speed limit when everyone else zips past? What good does it do me? I still got rear-ended, right? It didn't happen to me, thank God, but just as an example. As we get close to Rosh Hashanah, let's make sure we hold on to the good we have done and build on it rather than regretting that somehow we didn't get the payoff we were hoping for. Because we may not instinctually, or we may not explicitly think along the same lines that we do a mitzvah to get the payoff, the way some of these sources describe. But from time to time, that feeling does creep in. And we need to make sure that we are as stalwart a foe of that attitude as we are of an explicit sin in and of itself. And that we never regret the good we do, and instead we take pride in it for its own sake. And that we seek in the year to come to make it better and better and better. Take care, everyone. Thank you for taking time to study. That is a very big mitzvah.